I wish I had the courage to live a life more true to myself. It's actually the number one regret of people who are in their older age or those who are effectively coming to the end of their life, whether through sickness or just sheer time. When asked, this is one of the regrets that is cited the most. And I think it's something that we can grapple with throughout life, this idea of, am I doing things that are right for me? Am I doing things that are aligned with what I want, what I need, and what I feel connected to? Or am I living a life that is so far removed from that and influenced by all these things around me that the past looks like someone else's completely? And this idea about regrets is something that I think is a very interesting thing, because we're told, live life with no regrets. And whilst that is true to an extent, I think there's a lot to learn from people who are sharing their regrets, especially in older age. Those of us who are younger and, God willing, have a lot more life ahead of us can learn from the people who are saying, you know what, if I could go back and do things differently, there are some things that I may change. And I'm drawing on the book, The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying, and I want to focus in on 3 particular regrets. The first I've already said, and the others we'll talk about later. But not just what the regrets are, but how we can actually take steps in order to avoid living life with those regrets. Because we can't have everything at the end of the day, right? There's always a trade-off. You say yes to one thing, you're effectively saying no to one or more other options. But how can we live a life that is, at the end of it, or even during it, we can be like, you know what? Yes, I've had to say no to things. Yes, I've had to sacrifice things, but weighing everything up in terms of the net outcome, I'm happy with this. So before I go any further, I do actually want to contextualize the book a little bit so that you understand where these ideas are coming from. So it's written by a woman called Bronnie Ware, and she effectively is a carer, right? She's a full-time carer for people who are sick, and usually it's on a one-to-one basis. So she'll go into their homes when they're, towards the end of their lives, or they need direct care all of the time, and so that's what she'll do. And she speaks to them a lot, and she notes down a lot of what they are saying and the lessons they're effectively sharing with her. And it started with a blog that effectively turned into this book. And so that's what is going to inform some of the ideas around these regrets and around how we can live life differently. Regret number 1. I wish I had the courage to live a life true to myself. How many of us are living lives or pursuing things because of what our parents have said, or because of social media, or because of our communities, because of school, because of an overarching narrative about how our lives should be? How many of us are rejecting the feelings inside of us, right? The drive, the pull towards other things because of fear of rejecting all of those other influences, right? What it comes with when you say no to what other people say you should be doing with your life. It takes courage and a lot of effort sometimes to reject those ideas about how you should live your life and veer onto another path. But I think what you learn from this book and from reading people's stories is the price that you pay for doing that, right? In the short term, maybe you don't feel the pain of rejecting your parents, right? But in the long term, you have to live with a life that you know is not aligned with you. And this is just one example, but it feeds into so many things, right? Like perhaps you go with the flow and with what all your friends are doing right now, and you get to be part of that community, and that's cool, but you veer onto a path again that is not aligned with what you know you should be doing. And there's times when I think a lot of us have done this, like again, as social creatures, we yearn for that connection with our community, and sometimes this is how we get it, right? By just going with the flow and going with what other people tell us to do. But there's a price to pay for that. There's an interesting story in this book about a woman called Grace, which is one of the patients, if you like, that Bronnie works with. And she has lived an interesting life to an extent. She's happy with her family, she loves her kids, but her husband is described as a tyrant. His controlling nature has impacted not just her, but the family as a whole. And I think the idea here is that her fear of potentially leaving that relationship at any point in her life, for fear of disappointing others, disappointing parents, disappointing communities, kept her in a situation and living a life that was not true to herself. And that is not to say that when you have a family, you don't make sacrifices, of course. But the impact of this particular person was kind of rippling throughout. And the decisions that she made, she's now struggling to live with. And she kind of reconciled this with he's kind of sick at this point, so I'll start living my life once he passes, effectively. And the irony was that once he died, she actually got sick, terminally sick, very quickly afterwards, and was kind of grappling with this idea that I've waited all of this time to live my life. I've waited all this time to start my life, and now it's over. And it's not that necessarily the answer had to be her divorcing her husband or walking away or breaking up the family or whatever you want to say. It was even to the extent of actually speaking up and communicating with her husband, right? And really trying to find some new ground. But it was interesting that she had waited all of this time to start living her life and was quickly met with the end. And this is kind of the duality of the book, where we learn about the patience, but we also learn about Bronnie and how she talks about she kind of chose a path in life in terms of her career. Like, again, a lot of us will, doctor, engineer, lawyer, will understand this one, but one that she thought would make other people happy. Again, her family, her parents, and, you know, at some point I'll get to the art, I'll get to the music that I love to make, but let me just right now focus on making the people around me happy. And she spoke about the repercussions of that on her own life and the almost soul-crushing nature of choosing a path, again, that is not quite for you for fear of what others will say, how others will react. And I was thinking a little bit more about this and how Gen Z gets quite a lot of flack, right? Like, we get a lot of stick about wanting to live lives that are different to those that came before us. How sometimes we're called lazy or ungrateful. And I don't think that's the case at all. I mean, actually, sometimes some people are lazy, but that's just a thing in every generation. But the idea is that not that we reject what older generations have done and what they've built and the world they've created for us, but that we're evolving, right? So the idea is not to stay stagnant or to live a life that because our parents said it looks like this, or because the teachers or our grandparents, this is the life we must live. That is the life that you lived in the context that you were living. We would like to build on that, right? Like, we would like to use those fruits to create lives that are more fulfilling and more aligned, and hope that our offspring will be even more evolved, if you would like, in that sense, and their lives would reflect the work that we have done. But I think this idea of saying no to things is more of a thing in our generation. Like saying, I don't want to live that life. I don't want to live life like that. I'm actually going to consider some other things. One of the biggest takeaways, I think, from this chapter is just the part that pain plays in our actions and the path that we choose to go down and the life that we choose to live. Because one of the big ideas, one of the big discoveries about human actions and activities that we take and decisions that we make is that pain is a bigger driver in our actions than pleasure. It's the reason why, despite the fact you say you want to live a certain life doing certain things, right? And I have a pleasure, I have a desire to do those things. The pain on the flip side is holding you back because we want to avoid pain more than we want to seek pleasure. Right? Pain is something that we fear more as humans, and it's a survival thing, right? So that desire is nice, but I really want to avoid that pain right now. And so the pain of people will think about me, of rejection from my parents, from my society, from my community, is so great at this moment that it doesn't matter whatever that desire is. I will forfeit those desires and my pleasures and, you know, the things that I want for not having to deal with that pain. So what does that really mean then? And like, if we know that the desire to live your own life is a huge regret, essentially the number one regret of people who are dying, we don't want to live a life like that. How do you take practical steps to live a life that is more aligned with you? And I think this is a huge topic, but I do think there are some practical things that we can do or questions that we can ask ourselves to try to make sure that the path that we're on makes sense for us. The first is being cognizant of the way that the people around you and the people online in your actual online space are impacting you. And take a moment when you are making decisions, especially big decisions, and think about why it is you're doing what you're doing and what could be influencing you. That's not to say that the decision is necessarily wrong by default, even if it is in part influenced by others, but it can help to just break things down and take a moment to observe your decisions before you just kind of rush into them. The second thing I think we can do is think about how we can create mental and physical space and barriers between those things that are negatively impacting us or that are veering us from our path in a not so ideal way. And the thing about this is the mental space can be created, I think, with things like journaling, things like morning pages, which is something I've spoken about since reading The Artist's Way. This is effectively where you spend time every morning just with yourself and writing out your thoughts, the thoughts that come to you just on a whim. Right? There's no idea about I'm writing a graphic novel, I'm writing this elaborate, poetry, nothing. It's just about getting your thoughts out. But any form of journaling, any form of conversation with oneself is an opportunity to create effectively a barrier, right? At that moment, it's just you and your thoughts. And that's not to say these thoughts haven't already been influenced by the world, but at least you have that time and space to unpack them. The next thing I do is about the physical space, right? Because in those moments, it's just you, but sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes you have to think about how you can disconnect from influences that are driving to take you away from what it is that you want. Despite the fact that you may have had conversations with people or you may have tried to refine something, these influences are not benefiting you and they're not helping you get further to where you want to be or along a path that makes sense for you. Sometimes that means removing people from your life, which is a very, very hard thing to do, but it is something that we sometimes have to do. Like, you have no choice because of the influence they're having. Sometimes it looks like deleting certain apps, right? Apps that are negatively impacting you, or removing people from your social media realm, right? The people that you follow, the people that you interact with, removing those things and creating a barrier between those influences can be a small step. Like, what is it to tap unfollow? But the repercussions of that can be huge, because your algorithm changes, right? If you stop clicking on these videos and you stop engaging with this content, you start to see something else, and you may start to see an algorithm and content and information that reflects the path that you should be on, or that you feel like would be aligned with you. So those are more about avoiding things, but what about things you can move towards? And this is where it's important to identify the things that bring you joy, excitement, that make you feel fulfilled, that make you feel like you are doing work that makes sense, right? You are doing activities, you are engaging with people that make sense. That doesn't mean that things are perfect all the time. I always say this, it's not about perfection, but if you look at things on a net, right? Like, if you do the calculations, yes, this person, this thing, this activity, this environment makes me feel good, right? It makes me feel like I'm working towards a version of myself that is more impactful, that is more content, that is more able to spread joy and spread opportunities and all those things that come with that version of yourself. And then the subsection of that is, what would it take for me to do more of that? To engage more with those activities, more of that environment, spend more time around those people? And what will I have to say no to in order to lean more into that? Regret number 2, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. Now, I read this and was like, whatever the rest of this chapter says, yes. No, but the reality is, I think this regret is very interesting, because you can sometimes only see the consequences of working too hard after damage has been done. Right? Like, after you've done physical damage, perhaps to your body or to your mental health or to the people around you, right? Like, it compounds over time, and sometimes you're only faced with it when there's actually, I'm going to say very little you can do, but from the stories that I heard or read in this particular chapter, there was a lot of damage done by the time the person was ready to take action, and it's not a place that you want to be in. There's a story in this chapter about a man called John. Now, John worked very hard and he was a successful man, but the thing about John is he leant into work a lot. He spent a lot of time working, even at a point where he probably didn't need to, right? Like, finances was no longer the driving factor around this work. It was the other things he was deriving from it. Because, a lot of people do derive meaning and, excitement and a sense of self from their work. But it was having consequences again, or it was having an effect on the family, and especially his relationship with his wife, Margaret. And Margaret had been asking him for years to retire. Like, we're good now. Like, we can retire. Let's enjoy life. Let's travel. Let's do the things we want to do. Kept putting it off. He's like, no, I'm not ready. Or I'll do it next year. And time was going past and years were passing. And effectively, unfortunately, I should say, Margaret actually got sick and she passed away. And it was within months of the time he finally decided he would retire, right? And he would actually, spend some time with Margaret, and he could do the things that they wanted to do. But they never got to see that reality because of John's decision to pour so much into work and effectively not knowing when to stop. We spend so much time making plans for the future, often depending on things happening at a later date to assure our happiness, or assuming we have all the time in the world, when all we ever have is our life today. And it's interesting because there's nothing wrong with work or wanting to build a better life, and it's something that John speaks about. But again, it's this idea about, what is it for if I didn't get to make use of that value that I created, that money that I acquired, the skills that I acquired, and pour back into the people that I love the most, right? Like, at what point then do you understand what you're working for and if it still makes sense? One idea that I'm really fond of, and it leans really into this, is the idea of seasons, because life does operate truly, like, nature has shown us, right, like, how things work, and things are not stagnant, things do not stay the same throughout the years, right, or throughout long periods of time. They fluctuate, ebbs and flows. There are times sometimes where you do really just need to work and you need to grind, and in order to be able to do certain things, pay bills, make decisions, help your family, like, sometimes you have to do that. But other times the season is different, and it is a constant assessment, and it requires constant work that sometimes we're not willing to do, is to work out, are we in that season? And does the work that we're doing now make sense? Does the intensity make sense? But going even deeper into this idea about work is the type of work that you're doing, because this can also impact how you feel about it, right? I wish I hadn't worked so hard. Is it because of the type of work you're doing? Is the work you're doing aligned with your purpose and your intentions? And again, sometimes you just need to do the work that makes this money. But sometimes you can think about how you are going to structure work in a way that allows you to align more with what you think is your purpose. And there's another interesting story in this chapter about a woman called Pearl. She lost both her daughter and her husband very early on. And she's reflecting on things in life, and she actually decides to quit her job and seek out another job, which pays less, but is far more aligned, I believe it was community work, with the kind of work that she wants to do and the way she wants to give back and what she wants to do with her time. And Pearl speaks about if she had any regrets in life, any whatsoever, it would actually be that she spent so much time in an average job. Right? She speaks about how quickly life can be over. She's seen that through her own daughter and her husband, and that spending so much time in work when you have options to potentially do other things because of money or because of status can really impact, I don't want to sound dramatic, but your soul effectively, right? We spend so much time working that the impact of that work on us and our general life can be huge. Money is so misunderstood. It keeps people in the wrong jobs forever because they think they won't be able to make money doing what they love, when it can really be the other way around. If you totally love what you do, you become more open to the flow of money because you're absorbed in your work and are happier as a person. Now, I absolutely love this quote from the book because I think it's such an interesting idea that that if you actually do work, funnily enough, that aligns with the things that you are good at and that you know you connect with, and activities and actions that make sense for the type of person that you are and the gifts that you've been given and the talents that you have and the things that you've nurtured over the years, your innate qualities that you've built on, that actually leads to you being a person who feels the type of way, like you feel more fulfilled, you show up differently, which then impacts how you actually perform in your job. And you see what happens, like when people speak about, for years I was doing something and I was just kind of plodding along because I didn't want to be there. And then I made a jump, and it looked like a jump that was taking me back because I was going a bit further down. But that new path, the acceleration, the growth, the journey was completely different because I was now doing work aligned with myself. So what steps can we take then, and questions can we ask in order to ensure that we avoid as much as possible this idea of working too hard or working in a less than optimal way for the life that we want to live? I think the first thing is understanding the season you're in. And I just speak quite a lot about that earlier, but understanding your season and understanding what makes sense for the season that you are currently in. Just pause, observe the situation, and understand if the next step, the next season you need to move into may mean less work, may mean different work, may mean restructuring the model. If you have the opportunity to do that, then you owe it to yourself and to the people around you to do so. Another interesting reflection point around this is about why you are working as hard as you are. Because one of the things I think John spoke about, or it was unraveled in this particular chapter, was sometimes you're working hard not because you need to, but because you are fearful or you are scared to actually be with yourself, right? You're running from something effectively, and work is providing an outlet, a way for you to avoid dealing with things that you know you need to deal with. So instead you turn to work. I've just got to grind. Do you need to do some other work? Like, do you need to unpack some stuff? Right? Do you need to have some conversations that you've been avoiding with people? Right? Is that why you're working so hard? And the final question is about how you can inject more purpose and intention into the work you're doing. It might not mean like quitting whatever job you do now and to do something else, right? That's not a practical step for a lot of people. For some people it is, and more power to you if you make that decision. But how can you inject more of yourself into the work you're doing, right? How can you do that? Right? Is it about the type of jobs and the type of tasks that you do at work? Is it about the way that you do that work? Is it about the team that you're on? Are you able to move even within your job into another team that, aligns more with the impact that you want to have? And then to an extent, long term, how can I build out work, or maybe my own business, or effectively my own setup that allows me to be aligned with the work that I'm doing? And the final regret in this book that I want to pull out is, I wish I had let myself be happier. Now, I felt personally attacked by this particular regret because this is something that I have grappled with for years, and I still think is an active thing that I have to work on, is letting yourself be happy, letting yourself be content can be a very big struggle for some of us. Some of us are more type A personalities, and we're like, okay, I achieved this thing and that was cool, but like, what's the next thing? Or like, do I deserve to take a break and be happy? Like, do I deserve to enjoy? No, keep it going. Keep it going, keep it moving, let's move forward. And it's actually something that I spoke about in this video here, where I was talking about you could have everything. You could have checked all of the boxes financially, relationships, friendships, house, travel. But if you are not in a position to let yourself be happy, it doesn't matter. It honestly doesn't matter, because you won't be able to be grateful for those things, to enjoy those things, because you will be continuously looking for the next thing, or feeling like you don't deserve to enjoy what you have at the moment and what you've worked for and what the people around you have poured into you. I actually want to share one of my own stories before I share a story in this book, which I think about, and it's honestly, it seems ridiculous now that I look back at it. But I, on GCSE results day, was in tears. I was distraught. And if I tell you why I was distraught, you're going to look at me the same way the people on GCSE's results day looked at me. I got 8 A stars and 4 A's. And I want to preface this by saying I'm not saying this to gloat or to do anything, but just to illustrate to you how deep this inability to be happy can go for some people. I cried because I didn't get 12 A stars. And when I say I cried, it wasn't just like, oh, like, I'm happy. I was distraught. I didn't want to call my family and let them know. Like, I had convinced, this is how powerful your mind is. I had convinced myself almost that I had failed because I hadn't gotten the straight 12 A stars. And I know for some people listening to that, it can seem crazy, but other people, we will understand what I'm saying. And even if you can't understand it in that particular way in terms of GCSE results day, there are things in your life where you know you've achieved things that perhaps the world will look at and think that was amazing, but you wouldn't allow yourself to enjoy it. You wouldn't allow yourself to be happy about it, right? Whether it was a fitness goal, right? Because you haven't done enough. You didn't do enough, though. Like, I'm not ripped, even though you may have, lost a lot of weight and actually, completely transform your health. But I don't look like this person, so I don't deserve to be happy yet. I don't deserve to wear the clothes I want to wear yet because I don't look like this person, or, insert whatever it is. But it can be so exhausting living life like that. Like, it can be genuinely exhausting. And it's something that we genuinely do have to work on. Those of us who feel that we are already living a life where we're like, damn, like, I'm already looking at things and regret these experiences and regret not being able to enjoy those moments. If I could go back, I would literally, I don't know if I would punch me in the face. That would be a bit much, but I would definitely, like, raise your head. Like, you have done so well. Wow, why am I getting emotional? Gross. Like, you've done so well. And you deserve to be happy in this moment. Be happy. And so the interaction I want to pull on from the book is actually when Bronnie, the author, was talking with a lady called Rosemary, who was, she was quite, I don't want to say miserable, but she's actually described as being quite miserable, right? Like, she just doesn't want to see other people happy. Every time someone around her is happy, she's snappy. She's just irritated by people, and by people living a life that looks like it's filled with enjoyment. And she actually says to Bronnie one day, like, bear in mind, this lady is terminally ill at this point. I hate that you're happy. Why are you happy all the time? Like, why? How are you happy all the time? And through conversations, it became apparent that it wasn't that she necessarily hated that other people were happy just for the sake of it. It's because she didn't understand how to be happy. She didn't understand how to feel that emotion and let herself feel that emotion. Bronnie speaks about it being a choice. Right, like, sometimes we think that happiness happens to us, right? Like, it will come to us, but often it's about choosing to be happy. It's choosing to feel content with what you have and what you've achieved and those around you and the things that you have. And that's not to say that you don't want to move forward, that you don't want to grow and to achieve more, but you have to at some point make a decision to be happy with what you have and grateful for what you have. And look, I'm not a therapist and I don't pretend to be, but I do think this idea about letting yourself be happy is a complex one. It's rooted in ideas about the past, things that have happened to us, things that we've done, things that we haven't done, and in the future about things that we still think we need to achieve. There's a duality there as well. I think I'm using that word duality far too often. But anyway, there is that idea about, oh, I should be doing more, or I did this, or this happened to me, so I don't deserve to be happy. But you do have to make the choice, because the alternative is to live a life where no matter what you do, no matter what you achieve, no matter how hard you work, the sacrifices you make, you're never content. Every day is a gift, and we don't want to wait until we're on the verge of the end to remember that. And as I said, I was open about this one, that this particular regret is something that I still am trying to work out. So I'm not going to pretend that I have a long list of things that you can do, but I think understanding what it is that's stopping you from allowing yourself to feel that happiness can be a good starting point. Like, it's a hard conversation to have with yourself, but coming face to face with why you feel like you don't deserve to be happy yet is really important, right? Because I think if you just try to skip over that, you end up circling back to, oh, I'm not happy. You circle back because you haven't dealt with the underlying issues. And how you choose to do that may depend on your personal preferences, your resources. Perhaps you go to counselling. Perhaps it's, reflective journaling regularly. However it is that you do that. But That one's a hard one. I find one thing that's really important for me though is gratitude journaling. You don't even really have to call it gratitude journaling. Sometimes it's just listing the things that you are grateful for, because it's so hard to ground yourself in that sometimes. Again, we're always moving on the go. We're seeing new shiny things all the time. This person's relationship, this person's new house, this person's new car, this person's new job. That you forget what is in front of you. You forget the home that you're in. You forget the family you have around you. You forget, the resources you have access to. You forget about the food that you ate all day yesterday. You forget about the phone that we be moaning on our phones. Like, we have access to a literal computer in our hand, and we're able to scroll, we're able to watch videos like this, we're able to communicate with our friends, we're able to do so much. But sometimes until we stop and write those things down, we forget. Okay, I'm going to stop there because I feel like I've been talking for a while and it's probably become more of a podcast length episode. But I really did want to talk about this particular book and some of the things that I learned whilst reading it and thoughts that came to my mind and things I think we can learn from it. The more that I move through my own journey and, seek to learn things, the more value I think I see in those that are older and those who are closer to the end of their lives. Not in a morbid way, but in a way that, why not seek information? Why not seek lessons and learnings and teachings from people who have lived a life that is longer than yours? That is not to say that everything they say is true and that you must live by it. But perhaps there are lessons and things that we can learn and align ourselves with by listening to those who are older. Anyway, I will see you in the next video.